Welcome to the podcast. This podcast is going to be entitled The 47%. I was looking at some election stuff, thinking about October surprises, and I ran across Mitt Romney's 47% thing. And it wasn't an October surprise. I guess it came out in May of 2012. And I just remember that I used to agree with him. I used to think he was right. I remember talking to somebody who had basically my same values, but was older than me. And I was explaining to him why Romney was right. And this guy couldn't really explain to me why he thought Romney was wrong. But I just can't believe I used to agree with Romney on this. It's so weird. So I thought I'd read you what he said and put my 2 cents in. So if you've never heard about it, the story is there was a restaurant, I don't know where it was, back east somewhere, and Bill Clinton had been there as a candidate, and one of the waiters or bartenders or whatever remembered that Bill Clinton came through and shook everybody's hand, met all the cooks and everybody, and made a big impression. And so he was like, oh, cool, another presidential candidate's going to come here. And Mitt Romney didn't do that. He just came in and he didn't talk to anybody. He just went over and then he had a meeting with his donors. You know, it's supposed to be a private meeting. So this guy was kind of miffed about that, and he set up his phone and secretly recorded the whole meeting. And later on, I don't know how much later, but this was released to the public. And here's what Mitt said. I'll read parts of it. He said, there are 47% of the people who will vote for the president no matter what. All right? There are 47% who are with him, who are dependent upon government, who believe that they are victims, who believe the government has a responsibility to care for them, who believe that they are entitled to health care, to food, to housing, to you name it. And so this is a caricature of how old school country club Republicans think and how I used to think about people who voted Democrat. And this isn't really what it is. I mean, maybe there's some people who are like this and just think the world owes them. But I think what it really is they want the government to work for the little guy, not just to give rich people an advantage, not just to help the rich get richer and start businesses and the whole rising tide lifts all boats thing. That's not all that the government should be doing. Just getting out of the way so the rich can make more businesses and all that. There's some merit to that. But just because someone says, hey, maybe the government should help me out, not just with handouts, but maybe in a crisis, but with services and laws that make sense and systems that make sure that their labor is still worth something. Maybe not import desperate people to compete with us, to compete our wages down, or ship all the jobs overseas so the fat cats can make some more money. Right? That's one of the ways Romney, quote, saved Staples and saved some of these other companies is, I think, he just sent the jobs over to China. So he was part of all that, right? That's how the Republicans, that's one of the ways that they kind of ruined the economy by just shipping everything over to China. And they got rich doing it, all the business owners. But all the regular people who worked at those factories, their lives are kind of ruined. Those sections of the country are hollowed out and ruined. So people want a safety net. They want some kind of security. They want the government to watch out for them, not to please their donors, and who cares about the little guy? And so that wanting that doesn't mean you're a freeloader. Wanting that doesn't necessarily mean you want redistribution of wealth and to eat the rich and all that. They just want it to be fair. And it doesn't mean they're all freeloaders. And think about it, the rich get favors all the time. They get the economy rigged in their favor. They get all kinds of stuff rigged for them. They get bailed out. They buy favors from politicians. They get never-ending tax breaks. They're constantly getting more tax breaks and tax credits and sweetheart deals from the government and all kinds of stuff. And so why isn't that wanting stuff from the government? So here he goes some more. He says that's an entitlement and the government should give it to them. And they will vote for this president no matter what. And I mean, the president starts off with 48, 49. He starts off with a huge number. He means percent. These are people who pay no income tax. 47% of Americans pay no income tax. So our message of low taxes doesn't connect. I remember when I got my first real job. I still didn't make that much money, but it was more than I had ever made before. I was talking to a clergyman at my church, and I said, it just feels good to be off of food stamps. And he looked at me kind of funny, and he was a doctor. And he said, yeah, it feels good, doesn't it? Kind of the idea of to pay for your family. And I hardly made anything, but I still could barely pay the bills. And I hated it that we had to take money from the government, but we did. And there you go, right? But see, I believed that if I just worked really hard, I could take care of my family and I'd make good money. And it was kind of because of me that I wasn't making a lot of money. And part of that's true. But I never really thought, well, maybe what's wrong with the system? There are things that are wrong with the system that are kind of working against me. I never really thought that through. And that's the whole, well, you're a victim. You're not a victim. Just stop being a victim. Well, what if the system is kind of rigged against you? It's okay to acknowledge it. You shouldn't, I guess, use it as an excuse, but you shouldn't act like it's not true if it kind of is. And so, I'm not saying I should have made as much as that doctor. His labor was worth more than mine. But I am saying that my wage should have been a lot higher and still should be now. And most people's wages should be higher. The working people. But we don't have connections. And we don't run the show. And so they're not. So the people like Mitt Romney who don't really care about wages, who don't really, because in his world, the reason he's rich is because he worked so much harder than everyone else. That's the only difference between me and him, is that he worked really hard and I didn't. Or the trash man, or the cop, or the nurse. They just don't work very hard. They're lazy. They're not as smart as him. And so, yeah, your message of lowering taxes doesn't connect with me because the people who pay those taxes still have gobs of money even after they pay those taxes. So, yeah, I don't really feel that bad about them. Now, should I think the government should spend less money and it should take in less taxes overall? Yes. But should I think that load should be shifted off onto me? No, that sounds completely insane. I think the people who can pay should pay. We shouldn't have a Sheriff of Nottingham style tax system. And people like Romney never had a real job in their life. They never worried about not paying their bills. So they never had to worry about failing in law school or failing at medical school or, oh crap, what if I go into debt and I don't make it? I'll be screwed. Well, you didn't have to worry about that because daddy was paying everything. And maybe you'd have to go live at your parents for a little while and figure out what you're going to do, but you'll be fine. You never had to not take a chance because you had to make sure that you had a house for your family. Right? And so these people have no clue what they're talking about when they're talking about regular people's lives. I used to think that, I like he did, that people who didn't pay income tax were freeloaders. That, the flat tax, that'll fix everything. And so let's look back. When they created the income tax in 1913, for a married couple, where the tax started was $4,000. So anybody who made less than $4,000 didn't pay any income tax. And $4,000 back then was $128,000 now. And their tax bracket, the amount that they would pay is 2%. And then it went on up to 10 grand was the highest tax bracket, which today is like 325 grand. And they were paying 10%. And not even a whole 10% because it was progressive. And so they were probably paying, if like somebody who made 320 grand, they're probably paying 5 grand or something. So it was a pretty small tax. But guess what, Mitt? 95% of the people back then made less than 4 grand. So what would your donors say to that? What would you say then? 95% of people don't pay income taxes, so our message about lowering the income tax doesn't connect. They're all freeloaders. Yeah, they weren't all freeloaders. It's a rich person's tax, Mitt. The people who can pay taxes should pay taxes. And here's another thing. We pay taxes. We pay FICA taxes. Maybe you've never had payroll taxes because you've never had a regular job, right? You've only had owned businesses that made money, right? Or I don't know what you did. I'm pretty sure, though, you never had like a salaried job. Anyway, that's fine. You don't have to have had one. But when regular people get a paycheck, 7.5% of it goes to government programs. And, the excuse is, but they get stuff back from those federal programs. Well, we all get stuff back from every federal program. Just because we have a Social Security account doesn't mean it's not a tax. It doesn't mean the money isn't coming out of our check. And even the smallest, I don't mean smallest person, I mean smallest paycheck, they get that taken out. And then the employer, I was going to say the owner, the employer, they pay 7.5% on top of that because they have an employee. And that money could go straight to us. But the owner has to hold it and pay it to the government because he has an employee. So that's, in some ways, you could look at it, a 15% income tax that we all pay. You know how much Mitt pays? People like Mitt pay on their dividend incomes? I think it's like 7%. I didn't research that before I did this. It's like hardly anything. And they have this scam where it's double taxation because I own the business and blah, blah. Oh, shut up. That's new money to you that you're just getting handed for doing nothing. And you get taxed in one way as much, if you look at it a different way, twice, what every little dude at Walmart or Carl's Jr. is getting taxed. And guess what other taxes we pay? We pay sales tax, we pay property taxes, even on houses that we don't fully own yet or through rent. Because when the landlord gets an increase in his property taxes, he just passes it on to his tenants. He's not going to eat that. We pay for tariffs, right? When these tariffs come through, we pay for the increase in prices. We pay the tax of inflation. We pay a lot of taxes too. And as a percentage of our income, what I mean is there's a certain level of money you need to survive. And ours doesn't always meet that, or it barely goes above it. And so in terms of what we need to live, a higher percentage of that is being taken out than it is for rich people because they have $10 million left over. Right? They're like, you don't realize how much I paid in taxes this year. I paid $2 million. Okay. How much you got left, dude? The guy who's making 30 grand, you take 2 grand from him. Now he's only got 28 grand left. What's harder to live on? $10 million or 28 grand? But I put more in taxes. All right. Boo-hoo. I'm so sorry. And this isn't just a jealousy thing or, Rush Limbaugh used to always say, get even with them-ism. That's not what this is. This is saying, look, when the community needs to pay for things like roads, like the military, like whatever, you don't go to poor people to get the money. You go where the money is. You go tax the people who can pay the taxes, not the people who can't. See, the problem with a lot of these people is they think their labor is worth tens of millions of dollars. Like, yeah, a doctor's labor, a surgeon's labor is worth a lot. A entrepreneur or a manager or one of those type of guys, yeah, their labor is worth a lot. Is it worth like 1,000 times the average worker at their company? No, it's just not. But see, they've kind of figured out a scam a little bit. There's aspects to capitalism that are kind of a scam. And one of the scams is that you own this thing called a business. And at the beginning, yeah, you work really hard. And this is what they always say. You don't realize how, this is what PBD always says. You don't realize how hard I worked to start this business, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And then you sold it for $100 million, dude. Did you do all the labor? Could you have done any of that without your workers? No. So how did you get so rich? Because you scraped some money off the top of each person's labor. That's how you got money. Because eventually you didn't do any more labor. You set up this thing where everybody else is doing the labor. And yeah, you're probably still doing some labor, I'm sure. But the main thing about a business is you set it up so that other people work for you. And then you scrape some off the top. Now, starting businesses is a useful thing. I'm glad people do it. Like Carnegie, he managed all this stuff. He came up with all these ideas. How much is that worth? 10 times what the workers did? 20 times? 30 times? 1,000 times? I don't think so. And so the answer to this always is, well, if you don't like it, you can go work somewhere else. Start your own business. What they really mean is go start your own scam. I worked really hard. Yeah, scams are hard to set up. Go start your own scam. Right? How many of these businesses that make it big, the guy just does all the work himself? And how many of the businesses that start in their garage, they bring in employees and they say, hey, I'm going to share the wealth with you as we all work together. and I was making this much, and now we're all going to share in the profit. No, they don't do that. They're not going to share in the profits. You're going to be a peon while he makes all the money. Now, I know this is kind of a negative spin on it, but it's also kind of how it really works. And so instead of admitting that they're getting rich off of someone else's labor, they just say, well, go start your own business then. And so these people believe that if everyone just worked really hard like they did, then everyone would be rich. Well, there are a lot of people who work really hard. Plumbers work really hard. Teachers work really hard. Landscape guys work really hard. Truck drivers work hard. But everybody just kind of makes fun of them because they're not doctors and lawyers and entrepreneurs. But they work really hard too. They're in the market, their jobs just aren't as lucrative. But maybe the market isn't the best way to determine that. Now, I don't know what would be. But, I mean, think about it. Just because LeBron makes a ton of money doesn't mean he necessarily works harder than the trash man. He just has a more lucrative thing that more people want. So anyway, I'm getting kind of too... I don't really know where I'm going with this, but do you understand what I'm saying? These people think they're like superheroes. And so they deserve all this money. And they kind of don't. It's just kind of, they've kind of figured out a scam. And we've allowed the system to be that way. Think about it. When you buy a stock, let's say there's really good stocks that don't grow, but they give you dividends, like utility stocks. You can get a solid 8% out of them every year for forever. Because utilities are well regulated, and their businesses are regulated by the government because they're monopolies. So the government says, here's how much money you can make, and anything over that isn't fair because you're a monopoly. But they make profits. So if you have $1 million or $100 million and you just stick it in there and do nothing, you're going to make a ton of money every year by doing nothing. But how does that, it's not magic. How does that thing make money for you? Well, there's people who work in that thing, and you scrape some money off the top of their labor and hand it out to all the shareholders. So you're not doing anything for that money. I'm not saying that that shouldn't happen ever. I'm just saying that should be recognized, that these people who are sitting on capital and making money off of it aren't doing anything. And we should favor people who are producing things, not who just have money. And the system is really rigged for those who have money, not for those who do labor. And so Romney says the only reason that people were voting for Obama is because they're lazy and they want free stuff, and they can't be convinced to, quote, take responsibility and take care for their lives. And I think that's just outrageous. Him and all his rich friends sitting around talking about how regular people are all lazy idiots. Okay, let's keep going. Here's what he says at the end. So he's talking about Obama. So he'll be out there talking about tax cuts for the rich. He means tax increases for the rich. He misspoke. I mean, that's what they'll sell every 4 years. And so my job is not to worry about those people. I'll never convince them they should take personal responsibility and care for their lives. What I have to do is convince the 5 to 10% in the center that are independents, that are thoughtful, that are looking at voting one way or the other, depending on, in some cases, emotion, whether they like the guy or not. So that last part that he says is true, and it kind of baffles me. But anyway, that's kind of my maybe political elitism. People do just decide based on their gut. I don't know why people decide who to vote for. It's so confusing when you go watch people make these decisions. Anyway, so on that part, I think he's kind of right. And so he says, I'll never convince them to take personal responsibility to care for their lives. Because all those people who are voting for Obama and vote for Democrats are just obviously idiots. And now I guarantee you they say the same stuff about, right? This is what Carville said about Trumpsters. He said, maybe you're just dissatisfied with your life because you didn't work hard enough or you're lazy or whatever. So blame it on the migrants. And he thinks that's all that people who support Trump are doing. It's just more elites looking down on everyone else and mischaracterizing or caricaturing what their real concerns are. They're such elitist jerks. And so the only reason you could be upset with what's going on is because you're a bigot. You're a lazy bigot. Who are these people and how did they get in charge of our country? Gosh. So my point with this is, what really changed my mind, I remember Mike Pence, and I've probably said this before, Mike Pence in the vice presidential debate in 2016, he said, we have all these illegal immigrants and they're coming in and lowering the wages of workers. And I thought, Republicans don't say that. That's the kind of stuff Democrats say, but they were starting not to because they were courting all the illegal immigrants. And, the idea was we care about workers. And then I was listening to Steve Bannon. He said, dude, we should tax rich people a lot. They're screwing us. These, not like the doctor guy, the elite, super, super rich, right? He was talking about Larry Fink or whatever, the guy, I think he's the head of BlackRock. And they are screwing us because they own everything. And they don't care about us. They don't care what happens to us. Look at COVID. They don't care. So that's the idea, is that the government should care about everyone. That's true. But it shouldn't favor the rich. Last thing here, think about bankruptcy laws. They used to just throw people in debtor's prison. But in the Constitution, they wrote in bankruptcy laws, which means that if you get into debt, the government will just protect you and write them off and force your creditors to forget about the debt. How on earth is that fair? It's not fair to the creditor. But it's the only humane way to do it, we realized. Think about that, and think about the things that are like that in our world today, where people just say, yeah, well, sucks to be that guy. We should probably have laws that take into account human nature and that take into account, well, maybe that's not how this should be. And just because some people can get super rich and figure out how to screw everyone else over and continually lower wages and provide no benefits and all this stuff, just because they can get away with it doesn't mean they should, and maybe we should figure out a way to stop them. And that doesn't make us freeloaders, and it doesn't make us communists. It just makes us people who want to have a fair system. Thank you for listening.